this picture is hanging in my office, and it was actually given to me the first day I started there at AgriLife. The first time I went to AgriLife, the Dallas Research Center over on Coit and Campbell, I want to say it was probably 3rd grade. Oops, I was a wee below. And there was a guy, actually a guy that went to Texas Tech, and agriculturalist, horticulturist, and really passionate about native plants. I think before a lot of folks were passionate in the landscape anyway. And but before that, my mom sent me to a camp, and I don't know if I was in 2nd grade, at the Herd Museum, which is a neat representation of a blackland prairie there in north central Texas, kind of undisturbed. They've tried to protect it and restore it. It sounds like a lot of same stuff y'all are doing here with prairies around Houston. And I went to this camp, and I didn't want to go to this camp. And it was in McKinney, which was, I don't know, maybe 35, 40 minutes away. And as a kid, I thought, this is so far away. We just kept driving and driving. But after the first couple of days, I just fell in love with it. And I have vivid memories of Benny kneeling down and showing us milkweed, and he would, break it open and show us, the milky latex. And I remember at one point we came across a tarantula, and another time there was a bird out of its nest that we put back. At one point too, there was a catfish that buried itself in the pond. Anyway, all just kinds of cool memories about native plants and the outdoors. And so that, pun intended, planted the seed for who I would grow up to be as an adult. When I went to Texas Tech initially, I studied business, marketing, and economics. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And changed my major 5 times. Anyway, I'd always had a garden. I started gardening, 6th grade or so, and still had that passion for native plants through Boy Scouts. And it's pretty special to be working at the same place that he worked, doing research on all different types of cool plants, whether it's desert willows or Texas sage. There's false indigo. Anyway, I get to look out my window and see the trees that Benny planted. And anyway, that's kind of how I got started. Fast forward 20 years, and we were doing some kind of searching around in the attic of AgriLife where a lot of the old books were. And we found in Benny's drawer with a lot of Benny's stuff, there was a leather-bound, I'm trying to think, it was a journal of sorts, but we opened it up and it was a plan for an entity through AgriLife that had experts in every kind of field. So in turf and landscape architecture and native plants and rainwater harvesting, efficient irrigation. And he had this plan that he had kind of rolled up to his bosses and his bosses' bosses of this team that he was gonna have, this urban water program. And if y'all know much about Benny, I think some people took him seriously and some people didn't. Some people thought he was just going on these adventures and going camping all the time. And they said, we're not going to pay for you to keep going on these camping trips to South Texas. But we read this after we had started this urban water program, Water University. And it was just like, there was 3 grown men in the room with tears swelling up, they were rolling down my face. The other guys were welled up with the guy that 30, 40 years before had thought the same thing that we're trying to do. And so I just want to start with an introduction about what we do there at Water University. I also, before, like Cheryl said, I'm very active on social media. My social media handles are right there. I took a picture from behind the crowd before we got started, and I tweeted that out. I put it on Instagram and also on Facebook. So if you type in any of those search bars, TX Plant Guy, the first person to go retweet or to share that post on Facebook or to comment on Instagram is going to get a small prize at the end of this. So it's a small prize, so for those that aren't on social media, don't feel like you're missing out. So you might catch that hashtag what are you doing too when you're on social media. I did want to introduce y'all briefly to our website, which is wateruniversity.tamu.edu. And I have some handouts up here that I'll talk about as we go forward, and our URL is on that as well. We have a plant database, and as many native plants on this plant database as I could argue with are on there. But all different types of native and adapted plants for North Texas. You can search by plant color, you can search by sunlight, wildlife value, similar to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center base, only a lot smaller, and plants that are more adapted to North Central Texas. We're also very active on YouTube, so we have some YouTube videos y'all might be wanting to check out here. And then all of our publications that we do, some of these are oriented specifically for North Central Texas. So I think there's good information here, but mostly focused on folks a little bit north. But there are a lot of different publications on a variety of subjects y'all might have some interest in, as well as information on irrigation, rainwater harvesting, composting, soils. There's actually a neat landscape design tool there for you designers or hopeful designers. Also, if anyone is ever in the area, we are under construction right now, breaking ground on a brand new $38 million building that's going to have 80,000 gallon cistern on it. A demonstration landscape of about an acre where we're using native and adapted plant material. And we don't want it necessarily be a demonstration landscape like y'all have seen before, but more of a practice what you preach landscape. So the most current research-based technologies we have at AgriLife on demonstration there. We're also on Facebook too at Water University for those social media folks. So I stole this from one of my buddies y'all may have heard of, Brad Lancaster, but I want y'all to think about this as we kind of progress this evening. What is the story of your place? And kind of just think about that for a minute. What is the story? And everybody's perception of that story is a little bit different. Who here is from actually Houston proper? And then outside of the area? Okay, that's great. But all y'all probably see some scenarios like this from time to time. Yeah, I hope not. What is the relationship to your place? So kind of think about that. What is your relationship to Houston or Harris County or the surrounding metroplex? And then what is your role in the story? So to get back on track, ideas of beauty change with the times. We can all agree on that, I think. Does anybody recognize this landscape here? Somebody shout it out. Yeah, you're exactly right. There's that famous TV family. So let's go back and look. You'll notice that there's a lot of turf grass here. There's a foundation planting. They have their one tree like you might see in subdivisions here around the area. And so it's a pretty basic landscape. But then let's fast forward maybe 20, 30 years. You recognize this landscape? Yeah, so what do we notice here? I'm imagining this is a little arroyo, and I hope there's a cistern on that side, and this is the overflow there. They've actually planted their parkway. They've got a little bit of a buffer here, so it's not all turf grass. They've reduced that turf grass area. And then what about this house? Anybody recognize this? Oh no, this is a more modern family. And they don't look like that anymore. This is even old. But if you look at this, you can see there's a lot more than just lawn there. And let's imagine that this is mostly native plants. Let's throw in some edible plants. But this is more widely accepted, I think, in your neighborhood. We see the turf areas reduced, and we see more of the right plants planted. And whether that's attributed to some of the stuff Benny and the pioneers did, or the stuff that y'all are actually doing, boots on the ground, putting these signs in your yards. People think that's cool. It's becoming more and more accepted. But there are challenges to growing plants. Challenges to growing plants in Texas, but not just Texas. Specific challenges in the Gulf Coast area. And one of those may be heat. Was anybody hot walking in today? I'm getting used to the humidity. It's humid in Dallas, but not this humid. But we're not just talking about air temperatures, but also soil temperatures as well. The quantity and the quality of sunlight are important, putting the right plant in the right place. Weeds compete with our plants, not only for sunlight, but water and nutrients as well. And then water. You know, the challenges with water when we're in a drought in north central Texas are definitely different than the challenges that y'all face in terms of water down here. Not that y'all don't see drought, but you do see flooding as well, more so. And it's a little bit hard to talk about water conservation or water use efficiency when our reservoirs are full. And if you look across the state, you'll see that, I think it's 87% full right now today. And if you look around the state, that's including Houston and South Texas as well. But if we look at this scenario, you can see all these lines represent different years. And if we go back 3 or 4 years, we can see where some of those reservoirs were at 50, 60, even 40% capacity. And that's where we're getting our drinking water from for the most part. And so it's not a matter of if, but when the next drought is. It could be this summer, it could be next summer, it could be 5 summers from now, but at some point that's going to happen. And so we try to encourage folks to use the right practices so when that drought does come, they've built resilient landscapes that are not going to be as affected by that drought cycle. But in Houston, the Bayou City, y'all have plenty of water, at least most of the time. But I don't know if any of y'all know Jim Lester, but he's quoted here saying, "We're lucky to be on the water-rich side of the state. We're just not rich enough." And I think that's true. I think that's true. One of the reasons why water is so important in Houston is because not only is it one of the fastest growing areas in the state, but it's one of the fastest growing areas in the country. And so if you look, some of these estimates from the EPA, 54 million people in Texas by 2060. I don't know if I want to be around to deal with that traffic, but 5.5 million in Harris County by 2050. And so that's quite a jump. And then our water supply is actually expected to decrease because of erosion and siltation deposition in our reservoirs. Over time, some of that soil settles out when we have rain events and our reservoirs are able to hold less water. And that development, the growing population, urban sprawl, it definitely affects the amount of water that we get infiltrating into our soils when it does rain. So does anyone know the gentleman who settled Houston, the first person to come and settle this area? Nobody knows the name? Yeah, that's him right there on that horse. I didn't know if y'all recognized him. He had a brother too. Well, let's imagine that he's first settling around the Harris County and a rain event comes. About 50% of that water is infiltrating into the prairie, into the bayous, and about 10% is runoff going to feed our tributaries and eventually downstream to the ocean. So now let's plan a city. We need that city to grow. Certainly we need parking lots and roads for the city. Now we have that same thunderstorm come through. Only about 15% of that water is infiltrated, where we see about 55% to runoff. So we might have had record rainfall in the past couple years. And people say, oh, it's never flooded like this before. Well, some of that is because it hasn't rained like that before in some time. But the other part of that is that those impervious surfaces, the rooftop, the roads, that all sends the water downstream to the lowest spot. So one of the main concerns there is runoff. And in Houston, y'all have a lot of it. It's starting to move with increased quantity, decreased quality, and at greater speeds, picking up all these types of pollutants that we may not necessarily want in our creeks and our bayous, and certainly not in the Gulf of Mexico or some of that ending up in our groundwater or aquifers. So it's easy to kind of pass the buck and say, oh, it's those, the people with the feedlots in the rural areas or the large-scale farmers. you know, and their pollutants, whether it's fertilizers or pesticides, or maybe it's the new construction and those folks aren't putting up their silt fences, or maybe some people say, oh, it's my neighbor who is not getting the leak fixed on his truck, or the neighbor that's over applying their fertilizers onto the sidewalk when it rains. But what we do collectively as a community, everything that ends up in these storm drains eventually is going to end up in our ecosystem at some point. So if we all just do slightly better, and I know I'm preaching in the choir tonight, then it can make a larger impact collectively in the city. Has anybody ever seen situations like this? This is rough. This is hard to see. And I wanted to read an account from a gentleman that lives in this city, and I apologize for reading, but I thought it was important. It's obvious that we have not designated our city's infrastructure to meet those needs. Our elected city, county, and national officials need to come together to energize our federal government to address our flooding issues in the same way and with a similar amount of funding devoted towards the Sandy storm on the East Coast, Katrina in New Orleans, and others. So that's a perspective, and I think we got some head nods. I think that's definitely something that would help. We're trying to engineer the problem where we're not going to see situations like this. This is from a strip mall developer that said that. I also want to read a different perspective, and both of these can be true, or you may side with one or the other. When wetlands are allowed to function, they're kidneys of the area's watershed. Their special soil types are surrounded by particular wetland plants that help hold water in shallow depressions. They clean the water. They allow some of it to filter slowly into the ground. The rest drains slowly into our bayous. That process is the foundation of our region's ecology. The rampant destruction of our forested and prairie wetlands is upsetting the balance, drastically reducing the land's ability to absorb water. By allowing so many wetlands to be turned into subdivisions, we're not just kicking them to the curb, we're turning them into the curbs. We need the ecological equivalent of dialysis. And so I think both of those, you can have a new strip mall and you can have a new subdivision, and I don't think we're ever going to stop that from happening. I may have lost my battery, but I can yell. But something kind of in the middle there. If we can get funding to do large-scale green infrastructure projects, we can help restore the ecosystem function through some of our development. I want to talk about some ways that we can do that. But first I want to talk about how much water we have. So Houston has one of the most complex water systems in the country. 160 billion gallons of water were sent to residents in 2016. Those are the current statistics that we have. 635 square miles over 7 counties. So that's a lot of folks to provide water to. 3 water purification plants, 56 groundwater plants. 87% of that water is coming from surface water. So the majority from Lake Livingston, some from Lake Houston, and then in drought conditions, some of that is coming over from Lake Conroe. In the future, there's some projections for Allen's Creek to provide water to a growing population. And then now 13% is coming from the Evangeline and Chicot. Is that how you pronounce it? Chicot? Chico. Yeah. Aquifer. Yeah. So I've read it, I've never heard it pronounced. But I don't know if y'all saw an article that raised some concern a couple months ago. Has anybody ever heard of chromium-6 or chromium in aquifers? Can cause some challenges, and you don't want it in there because it can harm people. But there was a movie about chromium-6 not too long ago, and about cancer, an attorney that fought that fight. Anybody remember the name of that movie? Yeah, Aaron Brockovich. And so that was found in some of the aquifer that they're pumping water to the city, and now they're studying not only the level at which they're pumping that aquifer, but which location and how they can kind of, is it a problem? Is it not a problem? And that's something that raises some concern. Also, when you're taking water from groundwater near a coast, Sometimes you have to deal with salinity issues depending on where you go in that aquifer. There's some good fresh water, and then there's some water that's maybe not as good. There are also other pollutants that are a concern when we're infiltrating some of that water and some of those pollutants down there. There's a lot of different manufacturing here, refining, and then there's also, it's a large city with a lot of people that are doing a lot of things, and sometimes those chemicals get down in our aquifer, and it's concerning. So definitely surface water is the easiest source to get water, but there is an aquifer there as kind of a backup, and we can use both of those natural resources. Also, you get a lot of your water from in Lake Livingston from the Metroplex, and so this is water that's wastewater that's being cleaned up. It's put into the Trinity, and a lot of that actually ends up in Lake Livingston. About 40% should be enough to maintain Houston's water supply in a regular year. So that's you have another water source coming from the lakes in Dallas through the Trinity, ending up in Lake Livingston. So how much water do you use? That's how much water we have. How much water do you use? About 80% is indoor use, which is actually a surprising number when you look at the whole of Texas. Only about 134 gallons per day. So in Dallas, it's well over 200 gallons per day. So we have a lot to learn from y'all in terms of indoor water use. It's kind of just broken up here. You can see a large chunk is the toilets, faucets, clothes washers. Those can kind of make up the biggest chunk. But this is also surprising. This is one of the lowest numbers we'll see across the state. 37 gallons a day for outdoor use. And why is that? Yeah, you'll get lots of rain, especially compared to some folks around the state. So about 20% is used for outdoor use. And then kind of to break it up, multifamily, single family, this is kind of, we think about this as a whole, but there's actually a large chunk in comparison to other parts of the state that's commercial industrial use. So they're using a lot of water as well. And so there's a plan for the city of Houston. How are we going to provide water for a growing population, a rapidly growing population? And part of that is reducing the amount of water. Now this is total, so those are those two numbers combined. Gradually over the next 5 years, 10 years, we still need to save water both inside the home and outside the home. And there's definitely potential to do that. We've made some progress. These are United States statistics, but you see right here is everything in the yellow is 1999, green is 2016, and you can see that we're making some progress in certain areas in terms of the toilets, the clothes washers, a little bit on the showers. I don't know why, maybe we're making bathtubs bigger, but we actually messed up there. Well, maybe we're growing bigger. I know I need a big bathtub. But then also we want to look at the potential. So what's the low-hanging fruit there? Certainly, if we look right here on showers, if 80% of households now have a water sense labeled or a water efficient shower, that's probably not the best way to save water, right? Because most everybody, that technology has changed. When it first came out, people thought it was low flow, and I know when I wanted to get a water sense labeled shower head for our new house, my girlfriend was like, well, I don't need to get all the soap out of my hair, and I was like, well, it works well for me, so I don't know what your problem is there. But in all seriousness, that technology is great. Where there's the shower heads that are water efficient are just as great as the ones that we had back in the day. But you look here at the toilets and the clothes washers. So there's a lot of rebate programs now for toilets. And the reason that is because only 37% of households have those water efficient toilets. So if you're the city water provider, or if it's the person your city gets the water from, the entity, sometimes they'll give you money, a $100 voucher, this or that, so that you can get a water sense labeled or a water efficient commode. So if you don't have one of those at your home, maybe you have a 7 gallons per flush, maybe you have a 3.5 gallons per flush, you can transition to the 1.6, the 1.7, the dual flush, and you can save water, maybe 20 gallons a day, depending on how many folks in your house there are. Also, you can save water outside the house, and this is fun. These are design trends from the American Society of Landscape Architects, and this is stuff that everybody in this room is probably already doing. So when they interviewed people on and just regular homeowners what they wanted in a landscape design, it was rainwater harvesting, native and adapted plant material, 86%. I think that's a win for everyone in this room. Pervious paving, so basically just any of our hardscape, we're not just doing straight concrete. We're either doing pervious concrete, we're doing pavers, we're doing gravel, decomposed granite, anything that is going to allow water to infiltrate when it rains. We're not sending that water down the driveway, down the street, down the storm drain where it's picking up pollutants and it's causing flooding problems in the city. Edible landscaping, so there's a lot of native plants that you can eat, but also there's some other delicious plants. Rain gardens, something very important we'll talk about. Drip irrigation, efficient irrigation, and then a reduced lawn area. So I'll recommend that we need to give our landscape CPR. Has anybody heard that term? So conservation, permeability, and retention. So we need to save water. We need to install and design services that will infiltrate as much as that water, or we can retain it and allow that to infiltrate over the next 2-3 days using plants as the pumps. So they're transpiring and they're infiltrating water through addition of organic matter into the soil. So is anyone here currently harvesting rainwater? I know at least one family is. Hey, that's at least like 60%, so that is awesome. This is kind of a traditional type large tank. We've got our first flush right here, so if there is, there's birds go on the roof and birds do what they do, squirrels go on the roof and do what they do, and then it rains. We don't want that debris, we don't want that soil coming down and going into our tank. The cleaner the water going into the tank, the cleaner the water coming out. We've got a little leaf guard there. All this dirty water goes into the first flush. That's got a little hole in there to where it drips. The clean water's coming in here. It's entering at the bottom, so it's not disturbing sediment on the bottom or the top. And then we have an overflow. What we typically do in our systems is go a little bit further than that, where we have this overflow will go to a rain garden, an arroyo, a dry riverbed, in our landscape where we're trying to not only harvest water in the tank, but harvest water in the ground. And I think you'll find even in an area that gets a lot of rain and heavy clay saturated soils, you can harvest more water in your landscape than you actually can in this cistern. And then we do put a lot of times a pump and a city backfill line to where we have a float valve, and if we ever are in a drought where we need to use water for some reason, our pumps will never run dry, because that will inject a little bit of city water into that system if our pump or our tanks get too low. And that rarely happens for us, but it's a nice safeguard. Just a little bit of a different system. This one actually has this on-demand pump. It's got different pre-filters, UV protection, and then potable water actually going to the house. You have to spend a lot more time in this design, but we're gonna have this at the new Water University building on the AgriLife campus. We're having a 50,000 gallon cistern, and that will flush the toilets and the urinals. It'll be used all inside the place as well. If you're into rainwater harvesting but you don't quite know how to size your tank, there's some great resources out there. One of them is rainwaterharvesting.tamu.edu, and I actually have a handout right here on rainwater harvesting after, if anyone is specifically interested in that topic. But basically, you want to have a tank that's big enough that will hold the majority of the water that you want and you need to use for the times when it's not raining. And so we can see we can look at our average year rainfall, the times we do get rainfall, the times we don't. We can look at our roof area or surface area, and we can estimate how big a tank we need to have in order to provide irrigation to the plant material in the times when it's not raining. And it's actually very easy to play with this calculator. If you don't understand it at first, you mess around with it, follow the instructions, and it's incredible how quickly folks pick that up. There's also a little bit of a cheat here, and it's permadesign.com, and this is their calculator. So remarkably, I've actually done this for the building here. I typed in the address there, and you can see this is the building we're in right now. And you actually just drop this little mouse here, you click on each corner, and then this is what this is right here. So we can't harvest 100% of the water that is going to fall on this roof. It just doesn't happen. We'd have to have a tank that's so big, and then we'd never use the water, or a lot of time it would be too expensive. It would be cost prohibitive. But let's estimate we're harvesting about 60% of that water that's here. I want to go and measure this roof surface over here, so I've measured that. That's the second one. And then over here, I just thought, hey, a lot of us have a little bit of a shed. Maybe we want to start with a rain barrel. You can estimate the amount of water that you're harvesting there just by dropping a click there, click there, click there, and click there, and then it comes up right there. So just a neat little tool that for those that are thinking about rainwater harvesting may kind of push you over the edge. But this is what I was talking about. Yes, sir?
We have an 800-gallon tank on that corner and a 1,600-gallon tank on that.
Nice. That is awesome. Yeah. Yeah. So that's the question. What are you doing? That's the answer.
Not enough pressure. Like they'll use the rainwater to water the seedlings for the prairie.
Sure.
Because they're more sensitive. But until we get a pump or something,
Yeah, that's.
really run a hose on them.
Yeah, that's very important to get the head pressure, and if you're running to drip irrigation, you got to have a pump in that system. So speaking of a pump, let's look at this. So we've done this right here. We've kind of estimated the amount of surface we have right here. You can see we've got on our smaller surfaces, we just have a little bit of rain barrel there. On this surface right here, we have this going, this is what we call a wet line, so it can actually go underground, and then it pops up here, putting water into this cistern. You could cover it with trees if you don't want to, if you want to hide it, you don't like it. It's still got our overflow right there. And then the overflow is going into a little rain garden we have here. So we're trying to distribute that water evenly to slow it, sink it, spread it. You may have heard of that term. This is another one. This is a slimline rain tank. These are a little bit more expensive, but they're also less obtrusive. And so the overflow here, again, that's going into a depression. It could be a rain garden, or it could be some native grass, and it's kind of just going out and distributing that evenly. The same thing we have here, we can tie in rain tanks in series. So if you don't want to buy a large tank, it's cost prohibitive. You can start small, and then you can tie them in line, and you can do that. And there's a lot of different ways. We have some publications that talk about that in more detail. Whether you want to do native plants over here, you could do vegetable garden. Rainwater harvesting is the best quality water because it doesn't have salts, it doesn't have chlorine, it doesn't have chloramines, any of that stuff that our tropical plants are more sensitive, some of our wetland plants don't like. So now let's look at the landscape a little bit closer, and I stole this from my buddy Brad Lancaster too. Let's imagine that we have a downspout right here. This is our gutter, and most houses, I would say, in this city and all of our cities, they're going to have a newly planted tree, and they'll have this little tree ring around there, and then the water will be sent out the gutter down to the driveway, the sidewalk, then eventually ending up down our next to our curb and our gutter. This is what we do. And then because the tree needs water, we got to take the city water from the hose, and then we fill that up. Does that make sense to anybody? It doesn't, does it? And then where does this go? This goes to cause flooding. So if we think about our landscapes more like this, so a lot of those wetland plants you were talking about, plants that can handle drought but also can handle flood, and they certainly want to be those plants. This is a picture of Arizona, but we'll imagine these are Houston plants. If we have rain gardens or we just have small depressions, we want to put those a little bit further away from our house so we don't cause foundation problems. But then also we've got some curb cuts here, so not only can we catch the water from going down our sidewalks and our driveways, but if there is more water, these curb cuts will actually allow for some of the water to go into our little parkways, and then once they fill up, the water will just continue to run like it normally is. I don't know if you see a lot of curb cuts here in Houston area. We're seeing more and more of those in north central Texas. So here's the whole picture here. We've got We're harvesting water on the roof, and that's going to our cisterns. Our overflow from our cistern is going to fill and water maybe our higher water using plants. Maybe you have some bald cypress or some other taxodium. And then we have rain gardens, depressions all along where we can slow sink and spread that water, reducing the storm water that's going off of our landscapes. And so if you imagine one person with a rain tank, are they really going to make much of a difference in terms of storm water? You know, probably not. One person with a rain tank with the overflow to a rain garden, are they going to make much of an impact in terms of the storm water if we have a 10-year rainfall event in Houston? Probably not. But if you have this person doing it, and especially that's a great idea to put those signs in there when people are doing the right way, and then you're evangelical about it. I don't know how many times that if you have just a regular green grass lawn and you're out there, do your neighbors stop by and talk to you about anything? That's just not the society we live in anymore. Maybe the Cleavers were, but not us. But when you have native plants or pocket prairie or rain garden in your front yard, people want to know what is happening here. What are you doing? And it's infectious. It's like this people, the cool factor there. They want to stop, and you can tell them about it. And so if your neighbors start doing it, and maybe it's just 5 houses on your block, that will make an impact. If you have a 1-inch or 2-inch rainfall event and you had an area at your end of your cul-de-sac that floods, you don't have to stop that water. You just have to slow it enough to let either the storm drain catch up, or for that water to actually infiltrate out of the system. And I want to look at some numbers on this as we move ahead. So rain gardens can be engineered. If you're doing larger rain gardens and you're going to handle a lot of water, it's something that you should actually study. If it's just a small depression on your property, this is just an area that is not actually getting a whole large volume of water, you don't want to do a rain garden the wrong way and cause more damage than good. But when they're done the right way, they can incorporate all types of beautiful water efficient plant material, and they can actually reduce some of that water going down the storm drain. So we have a demonstration rain garden that one of our professors, Dr. Fuad Jabber, has done some studies on. And if we look right here, these are the rainfall events that are happening here in the Metroplex. So this is what this means right here. So 1-inch rainfall events, and there's a couple that are almost 2 inches. So on average, about 45% of the water going in those rain gardens are actually, that water's not coming out of the rain garden. It's slowed, synced, and spread coming off of our main parking lot on AgriLife. So if you imagine you could do that on your property, reduce 45% of the water going to the storm drain, that's a lot. And if 5 people in your neighborhood do it, that actually makes a significant amount. And if everybody in the Native Plant Society does it, and everybody in this society does it, you can see how we can solve some of our city's flooding problems that way. Also, the benefit is the reduction in pollutants. So this is that same rain garden, 78% reduction in nitrates. Our different phosphates are reduced, and then salts can also be reduced in those situations. So that's pretty interesting. Not only the volume of water, but the quality of water is improved through rain gardens, and now we actually have some pretty good data to back that up as well. So, most lawns are going to look like this. Lawns get the kind of the stigma of being water hogs. People over fertilize them. People over apply with pesticides, other chemicals. They don't have to be, but that's typically just what happens. And it's something that we see when we drive by a lot of subdivisions. So one thing we recommend is folks maybe not get rid of your lawn altogether, but just reducing some of that turf grass area. Planting third native and adapted plant materials. Maybe y'all want to plant 70%. That's fine. And then pervious hardscapes. So if you are doing hardscapes, do hardscapes, whether it's flagstone or pavers or some type of gravel, something that's going to infiltrate water. If you want to look at the water use between those three different areas we talked about, the EPA WaterSense has a real fun calculator there. I don't know if anybody's played with it. It doesn't look fun. It looks fun here, and then you go there and it's like, I don't know. They got letters. That looks like math. But actually it's not. It tells you how to do it, but all you got to do is plug the numbers in there. And if you say, I'm going to have a third of my landscape is going to be a patio, a sitting area. If I want to have a third of my area that's all native plants and butterfly plants, you can type in their coefficients there. And then maybe you want to incorporate some rainwater harvesting, this, that, and it just helps you calculate the amount of water you can infiltrate, but also the amount of water that you need. So it's a water budgeting tool. And you search through here, and the goal of the WaterSense program is for most folks to save 20 to 40% of the water that they're going to use in their landscape when compared to their neighbors that are using more water. But when I talk about native and adaptive plants in most crowds, certainly not this one, but y'all have experienced this, right? This is, when you talk about native plants, this is what people think you're talking about. I've sat in meetings with city council people, with people that were for water districts, and you would think that they would know, but they don't. They think it's yucca, rocks, and cacti, and they think that it's going to be twice as much as a regular landscape. And it's like, not if you come to the Native Plant Society meeting, there are free plants. But your landscape can be beautiful flowers and textures, different colors, plant material, anything that you can think of under the sun. And this is just the stuff that is you can buy at the local nurseries. There's the stuff that you can trade with your friends is even beyond that. I just want to briefly, I'm going to start going faster because I know I'm long-winded, but watering the right way is also important. So when you do have to irrigate, when we are in those drought conditions, only water when needed, water less frequently but deeper to have a healthier root system. In our heavy clay soils, anybody know the soil here? Yeah, but what is the name? Houston Black is the state soil of Texas. Yeah, that's lit. 2 to 4 inches of mulch will help to reduce evaporation. Designed for efficiency with your irrigation system, state and local specifications, of course, but always water without creating runoff. And cycle and soak is a way to do that. So instead of running a long cycle, you're breaking it into shorter cycles, allowing that water to infiltrate in between. Checking your irrigation system if you do have a broken pop-up or it's misaligned, or if you're watering and that water is going on the sidewalk or the driveway, try and mitigate that. Hydrozoning is also very important. So if you do have higher water using plants, put those on the same zone so you're not overwatering your entire landscape, reducing evaporation, watering within your watering window, which is even, I think in Houston, still most of the time they want you to water, avoid watering between 10 and 6. And then maybe you want to look at different alternative water sources. So rainwater harvesting, gray water, but also AC condensate or other sources of water. You know, you could have a blackberry patch and you're not irrigating that. That's just, you know, solely from your condensate, just an idea. Drip irrigation is kind of the technology I think we're all familiar with, so I want to go through that. It's 90% efficient, which just means 90% of the water coming out of there is actually going where it needs to go, to the plant roots. When I drive to work, I see people wasting water a lot. If you saw this guy, what would you think? If this was your neighbor, I promise you, you would want to make sure your husband's home when you go outside, or you want to make sure your wife's home and has a heavy purse if this guy's your neighbor. Because we think that this guy, something's wrong in this scenario, isn't it? It's not quite right. But we see a scenario like this, and you think, oh, that's just, you know, normal. I mean, for y'all, maybe not. But I drive to work when it's raining, and I see churches, I see businesses, this one dentist. I'm never going to go to that dentist. And you see this, but it's really the same thing there. Rain and freeze sensors are also important, is the point there. And then there's some newer technology. Y'all may be familiar with multi-stream rotors or rotary nozzles. These put off water over a longer period of time. So with that heavy clay soil, the Houston Black, it allows water to infiltrate instead of running off of the surface water when you're putting the regular pop-up heads there. Gray water. Gray water is something that I think makes more sense in arid areas, but it is something that if you have certain areas you're wanting to mitigate some of the water that you're sending down the storm drain and your showers, your sinks, you may be interested in gray water. And just recently TCUQ is said that they're building a standard for gray water in Texas that has not occurred in the past. If you're interested in rainwater harvesting, there is rainwater harvesting standards that you can download for free through ARCSA. And so if you're designing your system, this is a great resource in addition to the resources we have at AgriLife. And then also if you're interested in rain gardens or stormwater harvesting, there are some great resources through ARCSA as well in this standard. So you can look for those online as well. So I kind of wanted to wrap up here by asking y'all a different question than we started off with, and that is, what are you doing? Everybody gets it, right? What are you doing? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, thank you. That's my Twitter buddy, Lan.